Right. Hi, everybody. My name is Mandy Salley. I am the Chief Operating Officer here at the Woodhull Freedom Foundation. And I can't believe it, but we are in August already. And I have a really wonderful panel to discuss sex ed and censorship with all of you today. We're getting into back to school season. So this felt a little bit topical to our censorship series. And I'm going to introduce the brilliant folks who have joined me today in just a second. But before I get to that, couple housekeeping rules. This panel will go on YouTube and it will live on Woodhull's YouTube page forever. So if you need to dash out, do not fret. It will be there for you. And you'll receive a follow-up email with all of the wonderful resources and links that our panelists mentioned today so that you can really just tune in and listen to what we're talking about without having to furiously jot down notes about all the things you want to check out afterwards. Also, please feel free to use that Zoom chat. We would love to hear your thoughts, questions, and comments based on what we're talking about today. So go ahead and drop those in the Zoom chat so that we can kind of be chatting as we're learning and listening. So thanks everybody for being here. And let me introduce you to these folks I have with me today. This is a panel that's been rolling around in my brain for a while, and I'm really excited that it's come together, and I'm excited about what we're all going to learn about together today. So first up, I have Allison Macklin. Allison is the Policy and Advocacy Director at SECUS, Sex Ed for Social Change, and has been a national leader in the comprehensive sex education field for over 20 years. Also frequent collaborator with me here at Woodhull. So thanks for joining us, Allison.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Next up, we have Jacqueline Friedman. Jacqueline is a writer, educator, and activist, and the founder and executive director of Educate Us, where she's building a movement to change U.S. public school sex education for good. Thanks for being here, Jacqueline. Happy to have you.
So happy to be here.
Yes. And last but certainly not least, we have Rosalie M. Wong. Rosalie founded the grassroots Facebook group Sweep New Jersey, a sisterhood of like minded women dedicated to positive change in their New Jersey communities. Inspired by the national group Red, Wine, and Blue, Rosalie's vision has grown from one volunteer to a vibrant community of over 1,700 members, with 40 county leaders impacting 18 of New Jersey's 21 counties. I feel like a slacker. Thank you so much for joining us today, Rosalie.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. So you all have a lot to share with us, and we're going to get into censorship and sex ed specifically in a second. But I think before we kind of dive into that topic, it would be helpful for our attendees who might not know about the state of sex ed in the US to get some info. So Allison, I'm going to start with you. Could you give us kind of a brief definition, overview of comprehensive sex ed and the policies here in the US?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's really important, and one of visual that I have in my brain is always to, think about sex education laws in this framework of a triangle. So we have what at the top, the base, and it's an inverted triangle. So we have here at the base, we have our federal policy. So broadly, that is just around education policy. There isn't any federal policy specific to sex education within schools. And I say that recognizing that there are some programs that are helping to fund some sex education that happens, but there's not any sort of mandate within the Department of Education that says this is the type of sex education that needs to be taught in this way, et cetera. So while we do have some direction from the Department of Education around, what kind of math should be taught or learning around literacy, those standards don't exist for sex education. So then as you kind of narrow it down, so that's really then left to the states. The states decide what should be taught, and they all have their Board of Education or departments of education that set up those standards specific to the state. And so a lot of states do have standards around health education and physical education, and some of those include sex education and some do not. While then other states have taken the forward step of actually creating policy around sex education. So in some states, there is a mandate that comprehensive sex education must be taught. And in some states, there's a mandate that it must be abstinence only until marriage. So it really depends on where you grow up. And then even further distilled down is how the policies play out at the district and then even just at the local school level. So we see districts that can have, within the framework that the State Department of Education has created, can have a different policy around sex education in one part of the state versus a district in another part of the state. And then even further, the administration of those particular schools choose the curriculum. So it's really based on your zip code of what kind of sex education you're going to get, if any, in this country. So it's really a patchwork of laws that have come together.
Similar to many of the laws in the United States, I would imagine. Jacqueline or Rosalie, anything to add onto that before I move to our next question?
Yes, I just wanted to add, in addition to that messy patchwork approach, that even when policies are in place on the state or local level, we see a lot of issues with implementation. A lot of the policies that are on the books don't have a lot of muscle behind them in terms of funding or institutional backing to make sure that they're actually happening in schools. And so we are seeing, and I think increasingly in recent years, seeing schools just saying, yeah, that's what the state is telling us to do and we're not going to do it. Or that's what the school district says we're going to do, but I, this teacher, am not going to do it. And so in addition to all of the holes in the Swiss cheese of the policy, there's also a lot of gaps in terms of implementation.
I was going to jump in also at a very, very local level. Here's a great example. So Middletown, Homedale, and Marlborough in Monmouth County, they decided that policy 5756, the transgender student policy, they're not going to do anything. Nah, we're not going to do. We're not going to follow it. So yes, what Jacqueline says is true. Here's the mandate, here's the federal, what Allison said, here's the mandate by the state, here's the school district, and the school board is, nah, we don't care. Not going to do it. Okay. By the way, I want to tell you, SWEEP stands for Suburban Women Engaged, Empowered, and Pissed.
I would say that's one of the better organizational acronyms I've heard, and I hear a lot of acronyms in the course of my day here at Woodhull. So thank you, Rosalie. I should have included that in your introduction. I have a quick follow-up question about this implementation piece, and I apologize, might be slightly off topic, but I think it's important. What is or is there any recourse if a school district or a teacher, or maybe even a principal, I'm not sure, decides to sort of go rogue and not follow the policy? Does something happen, if they decide to do that?
Right now, those three school districts that I mentioned are being sued by the Attorney General. That happened in early 2023. So we'll see. I mean, it's kind of like the Trump playbook, isn't it? Just sort of drag out, litigate, drag out. In the meantime, for example, in Millstone, students were told that sex ed would be taught at home. You're supposed to homeschool it. Oh, okay. So there's all sorts of different interpretations.
Anything beyond no guidance on even how to do that.
Yeah.
I would add, it depends on the state or the locality. So we work with communities where they're having an implementation fight in a few places. I don't want to name them because a lot of time the organizing is very sensitive, but some states, it's great that at least the AG is filing a lawsuit in New Jersey. We also are aware of states where nothing's happening. And fundamentally, the answer is organizing, right? You have to organize enough support to put pressure to reverse the decision. And we have seen that be successful in some districts as well, that school boards will reverse decisions if they come under enough pressure from the community. And so a lot of times the most direct way to do something about that is for the people in the community to organize. And if I may, Educate would love to help you with that. So get in touch if that's you.
Yeah. Absolutely, right? I mean, anytime the public is going to put pressure on a politician or a school board, in this case, we hope things are going to change. And I think we're going to talk about a lot of stuff in this panel today that folks can do and get educated about. Because I think the other thing is, folks might be asking, well, why is Woodhull doing this panel? Woodhull is advocating for adults and all of that. But we all have to be engaged in this process, even if you don't have kids in school, even if you're not a parent, in order for anything to change. So, yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I think I wanted to add to your point, Rosalie, that the courts are supposed to sort of write things, but it takes so long, right, for them to do that job. I also think we've seen in the United States, the Supreme Court, the ultimate court, right, maybe not be the best arbiter of some of this, writing bad laws. And I mean writing like RIGHT. So yeah, thank you for all of that. So and we could talk about sex ed and how there are all sorts of problems in general in the US for our whole program today, but we only have so much time. So let's get into the specifics. Let's talk about the specific impact of censorship on sex ed. I'm going to ask each of you the same question. And Jacqueline, I'm going to start with you, but I'd love to just see where you see censorship showing up in your work when you're advocating for sex ed.
I mean, it shows up sort of at every level. I mean, the sort of most top level is the way that the main social media platforms censor our ability to even talk about the issue. We don't provide sex education at all as an organization, definitely not on social media. We just talk about the need to organize for it. And yet, we absolutely find it very hard to get traction. You can't ever prove that they're shadow banning you, right? But we do use the word sex when we talk about sex education. And it's pretty clear that Meta and TikTok especially are suppressing those conversations. And that makes it hard even to reach people who maybe want to learn more about organizing for sex education, or why they should care about sex education, or myths and facts, they're hearing disinformation from opposition and they're not getting the correct information. So that's just in the very table stakes of how we try and reach people, censorship is really affecting that. I'm gonna, I think, let Rosalie and Allison talk about censorship bills, because they're the policy folks, and I know Rosalie is working on an anti-censorship bill in New Jersey that she's going to want to talk about. But I just wanted to sort of set the table by starting that out. And then I know this isn't entirely on topic, but I think that there's a lot of obeying in advance also when it comes to censorship and sex education, right? So there are a lot of people who don't want to talk about it because they think they're not supposed to talk about it. And the suppression of conversations about sex education contributes to the false idea, by the way, that it's a controversial issue when there's all this silence about it, right? And by the way, when you poll on sex education, you get 80-90% support of public education in schools. It's polls better than abortion. But yet there's a consistent belief that it's a taboo or controversial issue, and it makes a lot of power holders, elected officials, candidates, superintendents, shy away from it because they don't see those conversation models. So it's not just about educate us, can't reach more people. It's really creating roadblocks to people getting the education that they need when we can't talk about it out loud publicly, when that conversation is suppressed.
What you're talking about is the chilling effect, right? And we talk about that in First Amendment, free speech advocacy all of the time, which I'm not going to belabor that point here. But Allison, tell us where you see censorship showing up in your work at SIECUS.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we have to go back in time a little bit. Because sex education and censorship have been hand in hand. We see censorship attacks starting in the early 60s and even going. And so when sex education was becoming more prolific and people were beginning to receive sex education, we start to see there's this negative fight back against it. And so it's important also to look at censorship and attempts at censorship in concert with other attempts to restrict freedoms. So there's no, it's not, there's actually the National Coalition Against Censorship was started 50 years ago. And the reason they started was because there were book bans happening around sex education. So we can see over time that a number of things were going on in the 60s and into the 70s that started to ramp up this opposition and this desire to really temper I should say, temper freedoms and really, push down on freedoms and take away different rights because that was threatening to what we like to call the regressive minority. So, and I think, Jacqueline had a really good point. We see support for sex education at levels of 96%. And this is across party lines. This is wherever you live in the country. It doesn't matter. And so to recognize that this minority is so loud and has this chilling effect is really unfortunate. And I think the reason they're so powerful is one, I think that they're really good at misinformation. Two, I think they are really good at pivoting and changing strategies to kind of whatever the fear moment is. And so I think we saw recently with book bans and things like that. Now we're starting to see it move into censorship online. And so it's kind of the fear of the moment that they try to capitalize on. But the impact is so great because we know that the public education system is a stress system. There's need for funding, increase in funding. We see teachers with packed classrooms and when we know best practices say that 30 plus students in a classroom is not good and not effective. We see impacts on learning. We see mental health impacts, and we're asking our teachers to be more and more and more every single year without training, without resources, without any support. And so when you put a spotlight on sex education and you put a spotlight on gender identity, or you have certain laws like what we had passed a couple of years ago in Florida, for example, the Don't Say Gay bill, how that can impact a teacher and how that can impact an administration is we're just not going to do it. We're just not going to talk about it. The fear of losing a teacher's license, the fear of losing resources, when we see things like what's Project 2025 that is calling for defunding of public education if there is non-compliance with their, which what they've said is they want abstinence only till marriage in every single school, then we know that that's censoring real factual information. So it's that silencing and that fear of a teacher losing their job, that can be a real fear because of obviously the economic impact. And so I think that chilling effect is very real. And what it leads to is young people not getting the information, young people just, carving out certain pieces of information that they should be getting and aren't able to learn about because of this chilling effect.
Yeah, absolutely. Rosalie, how about you? You're at a more state, local level. Where are you seeing censorship show up?
Well, I think the biggest thing in school districts that's happening right now are book bans. But I do want to point out something that Jacqueline touched on. It's almost like the word sex ed. We have to take back the narrative of what sex ed is about. And I watched at a school board candidate meeting somebody do just that. One of the extremist school board candidates started saying, well, they're teaching sex ed in kindergarten, and what are we going to do about it? And the other candidate said, let's stop right there. In kindergarten, sex ed teaches you that some kids have two moms or two dads. They're not going to teach a kindergartner how to have sex. So it's almost like, and I have to go give you the example of Tim Walz. He's calling people out because they're weird. We have to do the same thing. We have to say, you know something? What you're saying is bonkers. They're not teaching, teachers are not teaching sex, okay? You are bonkers. So we have to take back the narrative. But as far as censorship, oh, geez, I live in a blue state, but sometimes I feel like people think New Jersey's very blue, but it's more purple because we have so many different situations. We've already had the book Let's Talk About It. It's banned in Roxbury Township, but it's also been challenged twice in North Hunterdon and Voorhees, where, by the way, Martha Hickson, our Librarian of the Year for 2023, has received harassment, death threats. She just pretty much has been everything you can call somebody, a pedophile, a groomer, and when Jacqueline was talking about organizing, North Hunterdon and Voorhees community came together to stand behind Martha and say, enough is enough. We're not going to have people harassing our library. And that's what is happening in different school districts. It's hard though. It's like playing whack-a-mole. You don't know what's happening until it happens and somebody says something. So we can't. That's why we need legislation. That's why we need the Freedom to Read Act, which I'll probably get into a little later. I think you have a different question. But yeah, we're seeing a lot of we're seeing shadow banning with books. I know that Ghost Boys has been just disappeared. The upside of Unrequited disappeared. Like, again, just disappears. Or you go to the library, you cannot check it out. Somebody else has checked it out. Oh, well, it's not available. So, okay, there's so many different things happening, just shady stuff that's happening.
Yeah, I think that the goal of this program at Woodhull, right, is to illustrate all of the sort of insidious ways that censorship is impacting sexual freedom. And I think all of you just demonstrated that really, really well. And yeah, Rosalie, right? Like there's a children's author whose books have been banned a lot, Jason Reynolds, and he was interviewed and people say, oh, well, it's really good if your book gets banned because it goes to the top of the bestseller list. And he's like, yeah, but that doesn't mean anything for the kid whose parents can't afford to buy my books, who can only get them through the library, right? Like then that is, information cut off from that person. And so I think you just illustrated that so beautifully. Thank you for doing that. And Martha Hickson, we're a big fan of hers here at Woodhull. She's been on a couple programs with us. And yeah, there's some really, really excellent organizing happening in New Jersey. Can learn a lot from what's happening there. So, my next question is, you've sort of covered this, but I want to be a little bit more specific in how does censorship impact students' understanding of sexual health and relationships. So, a couple of you have used the word abstinence only sex ed. I know that here at Woodhull, we are proponents of comprehensive sex education. And I think we may need to provide a specific definition for folks who aren't familiar with what that means. And I learned a lot about the difference between these two things when I was a part of SECUS's Sex Ed on the Hill this year and talking to legislators. So, Allison, could you quickly give us the definition? Like, what are we talking about when we say comprehensive sex ed? What are we talking about when we're saying abstinence only sex ed?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, for years, there's been kind of two fields of thought. So I want to be clear that the regressive minority, or the folks that are fighting these censorship battles, they aren't necessarily against sex education. They just want sex education to be taught a specific way, and that way is through abstinence until marriage. And so when we look at abstinence until marriage and what makes up that, it's also been rebranded as sexual risk avoidance education. That is teaching that marriage is heterosexual, that young people should remain abstinent until they become married. And it also reemphasizes very traditional gender roles for families, really, focusing in on the nuclear family and what maybe was thought of as a nuclear family, and in my opinion, back in the 50s. So it is very specific. It's very aligned with Christian ideology, and I think the biggest threat that there is, or biggest threat that we're seeing in censorship, is when we think about is this fear or erosion of that nuclear family, the fear around, that there could possibly be different genders besides male and female. That is the threat, I think, and why we're seeing this rise in LGBTQIA plus attacks, why we're seeing all of these things are kind of hand in hand. So then if we look at comprehensive sex education, this is a K through 12 framework. So it's something that is a scaffolded approach. It's really focusing on teaching the basics and building on that information as the young person ages. So like Rosalie said, in kindergarten, it's very basic. It's talking about that there's different kinds of families out there. It's talking about and helping empower young people to know that their body is their own and no one gets to touch their body without their permission, and building on that. So I really like to liken sex education to math. When we think about math and we teach it to our students in kindergarten, first grade, we're teaching them basic addition and subtraction. And then as they get older, they build on that, and then they will learn trigonometry and they'll learn calculus and things like that in high school. We would never throw trigonometry and calculus at a kindergartner. That's ridiculous. It doesn't make sense from an developmental perspective. So sex education is the same. And unfortunately, what we're doing in a lot of these schools, even with really good sex education policies, we're still throwing some calculus at our high school students without that basic addition and subtraction happening, without that basic scaffolding happening. So when we think about comprehensive sex education, it's really important to think about it from this perspective of a scaffold, of building on itself, from an age-appropriate and medically accurate perspective. And so that means using science, using the most research, up-to-date research, teaching young people about sexuality from all those different perspectives. Because as we've already talked about, sex education is so much more than the actual act of sex. And actually this little bit that's spent on the teaching of sex is just, it's a really small component of what sex education really is about. So I think that that's really important to know. And then the other thing that I would say is that from a research perspective, when we look at abstinence only till marriage programming versus comprehensive sex education programming, we know that abstinence only until marriage programming, otherwise called sexual risk avoidance programming, is detrimental to young people. So there is shame, there is stigma, there is actual harm that it happens to young people when they get this education. On the flip side of that, when people get comprehensive sex education, we actually see that there are reductions in intimate partner violence. We see that there are delays to sexual activity. We see that there is an increase in condom and contraception use, which is really important when we are facing the STI crisis that we're seeing in the United States today. We also see improved emotional well-being and mental health, positive health, mental health outcomes. And when we know that our young people are in a mental health crisis in the United States, this type of education is so critical. So the benefits to comprehensive sex education far outweigh the abstinence only. The research and the science and parents and public, everybody wants comprehensive sex education. And yet we are still seeing this resurgence of an abstinence only until marriage type of approach.
Thanks for that explanation, Allison. That was really helpful. I think for folks who are not in this space, it's helpful to get an idea of what we're talking about when we use these terms. And particularly that sort of rebrand of the sexual risk avoidance instead of abstinence only. I have to say, some of our foes in this space are marketing geniuses, right? For changing things around like that. Um, and I often say folks will ask us, well, what can I do? We're doing a lot of advocacy, right, in internet freedom, right, and online censorship spaces. And people are like, oh, well, if we're not going to create legislation to help with these harms that kids are seeing online and on social media, what can we do? And I often say comprehensive sex ed is an excellent solution to a lot of the harms kids are seeing online, because it is comprehensive and it does have so many components of it that will really help kids like face all of the scary things out in the world. But I want to ask about educators as well, because we've talked a lot about, students and youth, but censorship is also impacting educators. And so, Jacqueline, could you talk to us a little bit about how sex educators are facing or dealing with censorship?
Oh, yeah. I mean, Florida is probably the most clear example of this. In Florida, under the Don't Say Gay law, a lot of teachers had their libraries, their in-class libraries that they had amassed for their own students removed from the classroom, like their own books removed from them. And also we saw them feeling like they couldn't even speak about their own lives if they themselves were LGBTQ. So it's very personal for a lot of educators. And also, there's a lot, as we sort of talked earlier about the chilling effect, the obeying in advance thing, we're seeing with laws, with some of the laws that are being passed that are Don't Say Gay style laws, or also the divisive concept style laws that are written in intentionally vague ways that are really open to interpretation. We're seeing a lot of educators and also school districts that maybe do want to teach sex ed, just not doing it because they don't know if they're going to be in legal trouble. And that, again, they don't have, the state doesn't have to actually pursue prosecution against them if they comply before, because they can't risk it, right? And the law in Florida was written in such a way that it was, I think, individual educators would be individually on the hook legally for what they taught. So it makes it almost impossible to talk to young people about even just their own lives, right? Like the lives of young people and the lives of the teachers, or to answer questions. So it's been a real struggle for a lot of educators. It's been a real heartbreak and a real struggle.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've talked a lot about consequences and negative repercussions of censorship, but I want to give our viewers some hope. And some ideas. That's part of the goal of these programs is let's not spend 60 minutes just talking about how bad things are. Let's talk about how we can change them. And so Rosalie, I would love to start with you because, as I mentioned in your bio, you're doing a lot of local organizing there in New Jersey. Um, can you tell us a little bit about what you've been doing there in your local community, specifically to get organized? You mentioned adopting Weird as a strategy. I think it's been really effective. We've seen it be really effective so far at our national electoral politics. But tell us a little bit about the work you've been doing in New Jersey and share some of your insight and advice with our viewers.
Well, I want to give you some hope, but I do want to just piggyback off of what Jacqueline said for one real tiny thing. The fear is real. It's real. I have parents who I know, parents of transgender students, they have their passports ready to go to Canada. So this is real. Like, it's not just some concept. These are people's lives. We have LGBTQ students who have been bullied. Some have committed suicide. So this is not just abstract. But yes, we're working hard to combat these things. And SWEEP, New Jersey, works with allies. For example, New Jersey Public, NJPAC, New Jersey Public Education Coalition, and ATNJ, Action Together New Jersey. We work closely with them. We work with New Jersey Association of School Librarians, New Jersey Library Association, ACLU New Jersey, the SICK Coalition, AAPI New Jersey. Everybody has come together to help with the Freedom to Read Act. We know we can't keep playing whack-a-mole. We can't keep just showing up at each school board meeting thinking, okay, what are they going to do this time? Are they going to try to ban a book? Are they going to try to get rid of a policy 5756 that helps transgender students? We need legislation. So we're so excited because it did pass the assembly in June. Assemblywoman Drulis, we pushed it through, and we're so excited because now it means we just have to get it through the Senate and we can make it law. And what the law will do is each school district has to have a standard policy when books are challenged. And people from outside New Jersey can't come in and start challenging books. It has to be people who have a stake in the school, so, and the community. So also librarians will be, hold on, pause. So librarians will be protected from harassment. The other thing that I think is interesting, and this is just a more broader, that from a state level, like we can get things done, like the executive order for gender affirming care, which, by the way, Tim Walz started in Minnesota and it was replicated in New Jersey. So it helps put in protections in place. But again, we have to keep showing up. We can't just think, okay, we're going to trust our legislators. We're going to trust the elected officials to do the right thing, because we can't. We just can't. We have to show up at meetings, even if it's just a council meeting, even if it's a school board meeting. We have to show up.
Yeah, showing up is important. I think what we've learned at Woodhull is oftentimes our legislators are just not educated on these issues, right? And I think there are some of them who definitely are opposed for whatever their reasons are, but I think there are also a lot of them who just don't know. And so the folks who are experts in this area, even if they're, parents of are experts in this area, right? They know what their kids needs. Showing up and talking about it is so crucial. So thank you for sharing that. And I will also say for folks in New Jersey, sounds like this is a great opportunity to call your senators and say, please support the Freedom to Read Act. For folks who are not in New Jersey, perhaps something to check out and try and make happen in your state. Jacqueline, I'm going to go to you next. What advice, what insight, what wisdom do you have for our audience?
Oh gosh. Yeah, I mean, absolutely start at home. So, one of the advantages our opposition currently has is that they're the ones. Can I swear?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I think it would be quite a hypocrite if I didn't let you swear on the censorship panel.
That's fair.
That's funny. I was going to ask that too.
Yeah.
Okay, let me roll it back.
Okay.
One of the advantages that our opposition has is on the local level, they know what time the shit is starting because they're starting the shit.
Mm.
And because there are so many school districts in any given state, in many states it's 600, 700 school districts, that state level organizers just cannot track all of them, like cannot keep track of what's happening everywhere. And then we wind up hearing that there's a book ban or a curriculum ban effort or something else terrible happening in some school district after there've already been 3 school board meetings about it, and now it's starting to make the local news. And by that time, the opposition has created the impression that they are the majority, when in most cases, they are just a well-funded, often bussed in from out of that community minority that's loud and obnoxious. And so if we know what's happening and we speak up sooner, it can really shut a lot of stuff down. It can be very discouraging to the opposition. They're actually not that used to facing real headwinds. And so one of the best things that people can do is just get involved in their own community. Pay attention to what's happening at the school board. Most of them, they're all supposed to post the agenda in advance and the minutes or a recording of the meeting afterwards. Tune in. It does not matter if you have kids in the school. The community benefits when there's better sex ed. I always think my shortest elevator pitch for why we all benefit from better sex ed has always been like, imagine a generation of boys who were raised knowing how to handle rejection. But I also say more these days, imagine if the Supreme Court had better sex ed. Like imagine if your doctor had better sex ed, right? It matters to all of us whether we have kids in the schools or not. And recognizing that and getting engaged. In terms of practical recommendations, we have a bunch of resources on our website, educateusaction.org. We have a get involved in your community tool where you can tell us where you live and it'll send you a little email if we know anyone in your area who's working on this already. We also have a guide to speaking up for sex education, and we have training actually called Passion to Power. So if folks want to advocate for sex ed in their own community, but feel like they're not quite equipped to do it, it's a free training. We have 2 different sessions running in September. You can also find that on our website, educateusaction.org. You can also take our sex ed voter pledge. So if all you want to do is just make sure you vote the right way and know when the school board election is, we have you covered there. You take the pledge. We tell you when your school board election's coming up and how to know who to vote for. So there's just a lot of different ways for folks to engage, but really absolutely don't think nothing can be done, because in most communities in this country, if you support sex education, you are in the majority. It just doesn't feel like that. And breaking that illusion is actually the number one best thing that we can do. So whatever piece of it feels appealing to you, that's a great place to start.
Allison, tell us your advice for folks who are wanting to get involved and make a difference in their communities.
Yeah, so I encourage everyone to go to our website, which is secus.org. On our website, you can find our state profiles and our state report card, which will give you a breakdown of what sex education looks like in everybody's state, with an actual letter grade that will help you to navigate that information. We also do bill tracking and are able to summarize trends and figure out and look ahead to what we think is going to be coming down the pike next year, legislatively speaking. So we are, we're sure we're going to see some censorship, probably in the realm of online type of censorship, especially around age verification type of laws. So I do encourage folks to go to our website. Also on our website is our community action toolkit, which helps people figure out how can we get started in fighting back against the regressive minority.
Thank you for those resources. So my next question is about the election. Some of you may know there's a big election happening here in the US in a couple of months. And I'm going to ask about where candidates stand on sex ed, if there's one who's better or maybe has a worse stance on that. And I'm going to have Rosalie and Jacqueline field this. Allison, I know you might want to give us your opinion, but unfortunately, the pesky IRS has very specific guidelines for 501c3 organizations. So Jacqueline and Rosalie are going to take this one for us. Jacqueline, tell us about these two candidates and their stance on sex ed.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, it's pretty clear difference. Kamala Harris has a longtime supporter of sex ed. She's been on the record over the years supporting sex ed, and just this year was the first sitting vice president to visit an abortion clinic, which was kind of amazing. And while she was there, she spoke yet again, unprompted, on the need for universal public school sex education. So it's very clear where she stands on sex ed. It's also very clear where Donald Trump stands on sex ed. I know that he's trying to pretend like he's never met anybody from Project 2025, but it's not really plausible. Everyone from his administration is running it, and it's very clear that this is his policy. Project 2025 is truly a nightmare for sex education, for education in general, but for sex education specifically. In addition to all of the attacks on education, which I think Rosalie is going to talk about, it specifically would make it illegal to teach sex education to young people, possibly to anyone in or outside of schools. And it does this in two ways. The first is by defining most of the things that would be in a sex ed curriculum as pornography, and saying pornography should be illegal and anyone who teaches it to minors should be registered as a sex offender. So it's not clear that they don't mean even if you teach it to your own kid. They don't specify in Project 2025. That also could be illegal. That would make it illegal to teach sex education at all. In addition, if that doesn't happen somehow, it gives parents the right to sue schools for teaching anything they don't like. And possibly individual educators, again, it's intentionally vague, leaving lots of leeway there. And it further gives parents strict scrutiny under the law, which is a technical term, which boils down to it'd be very easy for parents to win those lawsuits. The courts would be instructed to favor them in those lawsuits. And that fundamentally means, honestly, that public education would crumble. There's no way that schools could actually survive in that environment. But the first thing that would happen before public education crumbled altogether is that schools, every school, no matter who they are, would drop sex education curricula, because that is one of the ones that would be most likely to bring a lawsuit. And so people just need to be real aware that Donald Trump supports an absolute end to sex education in the US. You can make your own decision.
Yeah, Rosalie.
As Jacqueline points out, yes, Project 2025, one of the main mandates is to dismantle public education. So we have that. But as far as candidates, there is a stark contrast between the vice presidential candidates as well. J.D. Vance just recently said that postmenopausal women should be grandmothers. That's what their purpose is. And Tim Walz in 1999, when he was a coach, a football coach, and a school teacher, helped students form the Gay Straight Alliance in his high school. So when we go back to what can you do, think about Tim. Here he was, just a football coach saying, you know something, I have to help these kids because it's the right thing to do. And I think it boils down to it. We just really what is the right thing to do?
Thank you for sharing that. And everybody can make their own decision, as you said, Jacqueline, but important to get informed. And maybe sex ed is not what is on the front of mind for your average American voter, but I think, as you've also really illustrated so comprehensively, is that sex ed is more than just sex ed, right? And it has some really positive, wonderful side effects is not the right word, but it's what's coming to mind right now when done well. So I appreciate all of you sharing that. And I think, I have you all can't see it, but it says sex ed voter on my t-shirt, which I will be wearing to the polls here this year. So we're about to wrap up. We've covered a lot of ground today. I always learn a lot from these discussions, and I'm really thankful that all of you could be here today to share your insights, your wisdoms, your experiences. Any last final thoughts for our folks listening today? And like I mentioned, I'm going to send out that follow-up email with all sorts of resources and links. So folks who are listening, you'll be able to follow up in your own time. Allison, I want to start with you for any final thoughts for our audience today.
I mean, I think you said, I think we covered a lot of really good information. I think you said your final thoughts were really good. I mean, I guess I just would remind folks that this is an upstream approach, that sex education, in order to have adults who are able to have respectful conversations, who are able to be inclusive, who recognize bodily autonomy, we need to teach this to our young people. And the election season is a great reminder that there's a lot on the line when it comes to the future of the United States. I would also encourage folks to get active on all elections, not just presidential elections. I think, we talked a lot about the battles that are happening at the school district level. And so who is representing the young people in those school systems is also really important. And I would just encourage everyone to get active on this issue. I think sometimes it's a little scary of where do I start? But if you're really passionate about censorship and really upset and angry about what you're seeing happening around censorship, that's a great doorway to start also getting involved in advancing sex education.
Yeah. Jacqueline, what about you?
Could not agree more with all of that. Thank you, Allison. I would just remind everyone also that hopelessness is a tool of fascism, and that if it feels hopeless where you are, that's on purpose. That's to discourage you from taking action that could change things. And I want to close by telling a story that illustrates that briefly. We've been working for 2.5 years in a community in Central California, immigrant farm worker community, where the school district has just been flagrantly violating California regulations and laws about sex education. And when the folks who came to us from the community first asking for us to help them, we first started talking, they felt very, very discouraged that anything real could happen. And, it has not been easy and it's not done yet, but I can report that after 2.5 years of organizing and power building with the folks on the ground, that the superintendent has told the school board, has made a public commitment to bring the school into compliance, the school district into compliance by the end of this academic year, which is a huge win. It's not the same as it actually happening, but making a public commitment is a big deal. And one of the people who originally came to us feeling a little hope, or they wouldn't have reached out, but mostly just hopeless, we just found out last week is going to be running for the school board herself. And we're going to be proud to be backing her on that. So change doesn't happen unless we start somewhere. And when we do start somewhere, sometimes we really can win.
Thank you, Jacqueline. I'd love to hear a success story. Rosalie, bring us home. Last bits of advice.
Yeah. Somebody once said to me, all politics is local. And that's very true. Get involved, but even so, get out and vote and learn what's happening in your own community. I can't tell you how many times people have said to me, I didn't know that was happening. You have to be aware. Be aware of what Project 2025 is going to do. It's not pretty, but everyone can do something. It really starts with, look at me. I didn't think I would be a founder of a group that is making a difference in New Jersey. But it started with me saying, okay, I can do that. Ask, how can you help? That's really how it starts.
100%. And I'm going to outline it very clearly for everybody listening. Step one, after you log off, you're going to go to CECUS's website, download your state profile, figure out what your grade is. Step two, you're going to register for the Educate Us Passion to Power training. Did I say it right? Okay. That's going to give you those tools. And step three, you're going to look up Sweep New Jersey and see what they're doing. I can tell you, when I Googled Rosalie's name, there was a whole lot of reading material. Okay. So there are 3 very concrete things that everybody listening can do today to start to make that change. So I want to thank all of you for being here. Thank you for leaving us on a note of hope, giving us some inspiration. I know that the next couple of months are going to be feeling kind of tense, I'll say, with the increase in election coverage and all of that. So I appreciate how we left this conversation today. And those who are here and listening, please share the recording of this with folks who couldn't be here today, because there's a lot to be learned. Check your email for all of the resources that our panelists were kind enough to share with us today. And make sure you're following Woodhull. Make sure you're subscribed to our email list, because we take a different topic every month here in the censorship series to discuss. And we will be back next month. September is Sexual Freedom Month. September 23rd is Sexual Freedom Day. So we are going to be taking this inspiration and this hopeful tone with us into next month and talking about all the wonderful things sexual freedom can do to you. And also if you do for you, rather, or to you, user's choice. But if you learned something today, please head over to woodhullfoundation.org/donate and make a donation so that we can keep creating this program free and accessible for all of you. Thanks for being here, everybody.